Happy Halloween, all my history-loving friends. This is Madam Morbid. Welcome to this spooky Halloween special. We are going to be talking about an actual boy that inspired William Peter Blatty to write the novel that became one of the most iconic horror movies of all time. We're talking people passing out in the theater, people getting sick, people having to run out in terror. And it says, based on a true story at the beginning of the movie. The movie, of course, features 12-year-old girl named Reagan. But in real life, it was a 13-year-old boy named Ronald Hunkeler. He was identified after his death in 2020. Now, he died of a stroke. I know what you're thinking, it wasn't that. Hunkeler had an aunt named Tilly, who lived in St. Louis. Aunt Tilly loved old school St. Louis spiritualism. It had been big in St. Louis for years. It had kind of died off around the Great War, but Aunt Tilly grew up when it was at its heyday. Have any of you ever heard of Pearl Curran? I will definitely be doing a story on this lady. Pearl was a spiritualist writer. And I don't mean she wrote books about spiritualism. No, the spirits dictated books to Pearl that she then had published for them. They dictated it through the Ouija board. And Pearl continued actively doing her spiritualist stuff up until well into the 1930s. So Aunt Tilly grew up around this stuff and loved it. She and Ronald used to use the Ouija board together. She taught him how, and then later he would go on and he would use it himself on his own. This is said to be the way Ronald got in trouble. Everything that happens before they arrive in St. Louis is questionable, and the reason being that almost all of it comes from word of mouth, and as stories pass down, we know, game of telephone, things get crazier and crazier the more they're told. So just keep that in mind as you're listening to this first part of the story. Our story begins January 15th, 1949. Ronald is home with his grandmother, and they are sitting there when they start hearing dripping noises. Drip, drip, drip. So they walk around and they check all of the sinks. Nothing going on there. They hear dripping in Grandma's room, so they go into Grandma's room. And when they get in there, they start hearing scratching under the floorboards. And she has a picture of Christ hanging up on the wall. And suddenly it starts to shake. Well, they think this is rats. We must have some sort of vermin problem. They're knocking the wall from the other side. They're making that scratching noise. So they call an exterminator. Exterminator comes out, leaves out poison, traps. But the sounds continue for 10 days, and they always last from 7 p.m. to midnight. They hear this noise. And then things died down. They thought, oh, well, the rats are dead. After these noises stop, on January 25th, the next day, Aunt Tilly dies. And it's 3 days after this that young Ronald begins hearing a new sound. It sounds like squeaky tennis shoes. You guys know what that sounds like? Squeaky tennis shoes on a basketball court? He hears that going up and back all along his bed at night. His mother starts to wonder, maybe this is Aunt Tilly haunting us. Ronald, his mother, and his grandmother sit on the bed. And his mother says, "Tilly, is that you? If that's you, knock 3 times. They say all 3 were hit with 3 gusts of wind, followed by a knock. Okay, that's kind of weird. Maybe it's a coincidence, though. Let's check. Tilly, if that's you, knock 4 times. Again, 4 gusts of wind hit them in the face, each time followed by a knock. Oh, so maybe this is Aunt Tilly. At that moment, scratch marks appear across the bed. And at that moment, the sheets, which had been tucked around the mattress, suddenly came untucked and stood straight out, as if they had been starched. Ronald's mother went up and touched the corner of one, and at that very second, it fell back down to its normal position as if a string had been cut and released it. Every night, Ronald's bed would shake, and he would hear these noises, the squeaking, walking along the side of his bed. And it followed him to school. He would sit in his desk, and it would move around. His mother described it as moving around like the planchette on a Ouija board. But it became so distracting, the school actually asked him to leave because it was too distracting. So at that point, Ronald just had to go home. Meanwhile, at home, things are flying through the air. They say coat hangers came out of the closet, flew across the room, and at one point, even a Bible flew off the shelf and landed at Ronald's feet. Ronald's family is completely perplexed. Since it all seems to be centered around him, they take him to a series of doctors who do all of these tests on him, psychiatrists, medical doctors, and they all come back and say, "We don't see anything wrong with him." The psychiatrist did say he seemed a little high-strung, but my gosh, if you were going through this, wouldn't you be too? Well, I can tell you I would. I'm high-strung anyway, just by nature. On February 17th, after exhausting all of these medical avenues, the family is tired of this, so they decide to turn to their church. Now, the family was Lutheran, so they turned to their own personal Reverend Luther Schulz. Now, Reverend Schulz really believed in the paranormal, and he thought this case was probably of a poltergeist. Poltergeist activity usually stays within that specific home. So he said, "Let's have Ronald stay the night at my house, and I'll just see if anything happens." Nights for Ronald had gotten very terrible. His bed would shake. He would writhe and thrash. February 17th, he's at the Reverend's house. He puts him to bed. And sure enough, Ronald's bed begins to shake. The Reverend witnesses this. The bed's on rollers, so he thinks, well, maybe I'll make a pallet on the floor. So he makes a pallet. And sure enough, the blanket pallet begins to slide around, and then it slid right underneath the bed. Now, this is a part of the story that is suspected maybe never happened. This might be one of those exaggerations to make the story more entertaining. We really don't know. While he's staying with the Reverend, scratches start to appear on Ronald, on his legs, on his arms, and on his chest. They look like cat scratches, or if you've been walking through thorns and you get scratches on you. And they are said to have burned and hurt, as it does. I've been scratched by a cat and thorns many times. It burns, it sucks. And it's when these start appearing, the Reverend says, I can't do anything about this. So he takes Ronald home, he goes to his mother and he says, look, I can't do anything about this. You need to contact the Catholic Church. They know how to deal with things like this. See ya. February 26th, after 4 more nights of the scratches showing up, she seeks out a Catholic priest named Edward Hughes. Now, normally, the Catholic Church makes you go to doctors and do all of this stuff first. They had already done that. So what Father Hughes does, he gives her some blessed candles and some holy water. And by the way, I am not Catholic. If I mess up anything in terms of the religious stuff in this episode, I apologize. It's definitely not my forte. So he gives her this holy water and she takes it home and she's sprinkling it all over the house. And she says that when she got done, she set the bottle down and it flew across the room. Well, since the holy water didn't seem to work, she gets out the blessed candles. She lights them and she starts walking around the house with them. And according to her, and I think maybe we have an exaggeration alert coming here, the flames got huge and shot to the ceiling. I'm betting it was more of a maybe they just got a little bit stronger. That's just my suspicion. Anyway, what do we do now? Father Hughes comes over and he starts talking to Ronald. And it's at this point that Ronald starts speaking in Latin. And he says, in Latin, which I do not know, he says this.
O priest of Christ, know that I am the devil. Why do you keep bothering me?
Popular history says that after this, Father Hughes requested of the church an official exorcism, which would take place at Georgetown Hospital. This probably never happened, but it's a really great story, so people keep telling it. So I will tell it to you with the caveat that it probably never happened. There's no record of a first exorcism. The priest in St. Louis knew nothing about a previous exorcism attempt, so take it for what it's worth. The story goes, Father Hughes is in the hospital and he's doing this exorcism, and Ronald gets one arm loose from his restraints, pushes his fist into the mattress, rips out a bed spring, and cuts the priest from his shoulder to his wrist, requiring 100 stitches. No one who knew Father Hughes remembers him having a horrendous injury like this. He was a coach of the Little League baseball team, he taught PE, and he never had an injury that prevented him from teaching or being active. So if it happened, maybe he got poked with a bed spring, if there's a grain of truth in this, but he certainly wasn't cut from stem to stern. Well, the family discharges him from the hospital the first week of March, and Ronald is getting more and more violent. He is screaming, he is raging, and it's bothering the neighbors. And they come to this decision, and this is a dramatic decision. Maybe we need a change of scenery. Maybe that would help him. We could go to St. Louis, stay with his father's relatives. Tilly was his father's sister. Maybe they had this thought in their mind that the house was part of the problem. That a different city, a different vibe, maybe that's going to help. Shortly after this, the word Louis is carved into Ronald's chest. So they pack up and go to St. Louis. They show up in the St. Louis neighborhood of Belle Noire, and they settle down in this house. It's privately owned, so don't go bothering them, but it is common for people to drive by, looky-loo, or get out and take pictures like I did. I didn't want to linger, though. I didn't stand there and talk. I just feel weird about that when I'm outside a person's house. So they're staying here, and the first few nights are somewhat better, but then it all starts up again. The bed shaking, the screaming, the thrashing. And his cousin, who went to St. Louis University, she approached one of the Jesuit priests who was an instructor there. His name was Father Raymond Bishop. And she told him what was going on, and she asked if he could help. And he said, I will definitely come take a look. That very night, Father Bishop went to the home to see Ronald. He took with him a second-class relic of St. Margaret Mary. It's my understanding that a second-class relic is something they would have worn, like a piece of clothing. Father Bishop blesses the house. He takes the relic and he places it on the pillow next to Ronald's head. Then he goes downstairs to talk to the family. While he is down there, Ronald starts screaming for help. The bed is shaking. Scratches are appearing on his body. The father runs back upstairs, opens the door. The relic has flown across the room. And the bed shaking apparently continued for hours into the night after that. Father Bishop realizes, boy, this is beyond my ability to handle. He approaches a friend, Father William Bowden. Father Bowden was a tough guy. He had served in World War II as a chaplain, no-nonsense kind of guy. Bishop goes to him and tells him what he's seen, and they go to the house together on March 11th. And this time, they take a first-class relic, which is actually a part of the body. They take a bone fragment from the forearm of St. Francis Xavier. They go to the house, they bless it, and they start off putting the second-class relic on Ronald's pillow. They visit with the family, and when Ronald goes to bed, they just sit and wait to see what will happen. Ronald wakes up. It doesn't sound like he's upset this time. He just lets them know that the relic had come unclasped. It had flown across the room, hit a mirror, and woke him up. So they take the relic, they put it back in its place, and they add the St. Francis Xavier relic. And they go back downstairs. They're sitting there talking when suddenly they hear a crash from upstairs. They run up the stairs and they go in, and Ronald tells them that a bottle of holy water had gone off the shelf and smashed into the wall. They calm him down, get him comfortable, hoping he can get to sleep, and then leave the room again. I'm wondering why they didn't stay in the room, but well, this time, as they're sitting there waiting, they hear this sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Ronald starts screaming for help. They run up the stairs, only to find that a heavy dresser has been placed in front of the bedroom door. They start hitting the door with their shoulders, push their way in, and not only has this dresser been pushed in front of the door, a stool from a desk has been moved across the room. Ronald has scratch marks on his body again. As they are putting the room back together, it is said that as they put the stool back where it belonged at the desk, it flipped itself over by itself again. They found the Francis Xavier relic at the foot of the bed, and the Margaret Mary relic was gone, and they never found it again. After witnessing this, the two priests decide, we've got to move forward with this. Let's contact Archbishop Ritter and request an officially sanctioned exorcism of this boy. They do that, and by March 16th, they have the approval, and the exorcism begins that day. They decided to take along a young man named Walter Helerin. He was a student at St. Louis University studying to be a priest. He wasn't yet. He was 28 years old, and he played on the football team. So they thought, well, we'll have this young, strong guy to help hold him down, because the boy exhibited unbelievable strength. So they show up the night of the 16th, and they begin the proceedings right there in the house. They're right at the beginning, just doing the Principio, which is the opening prayers. At any mention of Jesus, Mary, or Michael, scratches would appear on the boy, on his arms, on his legs, on his stomach, on his back, on his chest, on his face, and it would write words. And some of these scratches were so deep they drew blood, and it was painful. He was crying out in pain, and it would write hell, so that if he looked down, he could read it. The worst thing to be carved into the boy's skin that night was a picture of the devil with its arms up in the air. By the end of the night, Ronald is said to have had 25 different scratch wounds on his body in various places. Ronald then went into a trance-like state. He began violently striking the bed. He started singing songs he claimed he didn't know. Old songs like Old Swanee River or The Blue Danube. And he started spitting on people. And he apparently could hit people from feet away from him, and he never missed, even if his eyes were shut. They brought Helerin along to help hold him down. During the night, at certain points, it took 2 grown men to hold him down. This went on until 7:30 in the morning. These priests were staying up every night. From the 16th of March to the 21st, the priests were there every single night when he went to bed to recite the prayers of exorcism until he went to sleep, however long that took. If they got to the end of the prayers and he was still awake, they started all over again. Father Bowden was fasting during this. He lost, I think, 40 pounds as this was going on because it kept taking longer and longer and longer. It's not like in the movies where they have an exorcism, it's one day. Woo, they're better. When they're doing an actual exorcism, it is night after night after night after night. Every night it pretty much took 2 adult men to hold him down and restrain him. He was shouting things even fouler than the things Reagan said in the film. As this goes on night after night after night, the family in this home is exhausted. They cannot deal with him screaming all night long, every night. The decision is made to move him to the psychological ward of the Alexian Brothers Hospital. This is a hospital basically that took cases nobody else would. And by being in a psych ward, the noise was less likely to bother other people. He was only there for one night. It scared him. It was a padded room with no door, bars on the windows, and he was frightened. The family at least got one night of good, pure rest. The only family member that was allowed to go with him was his father. The next day, they sent him back home because of how frightened he had been and that they didn't want him to feel like he was in prison. But again, he had these horrible, horrible fits, kept the family up, and the decision was made, the hospital's not going to work. Let's move him to St. Louis University into the rectory. That rectory is no longer there. Neither is the ward where he stayed in the Alexian Brothers Hospital. He will be back there later on, but for right now, he's only been there one night. Maybe if we convert him to the Catholic faith, that will make it easier to heal him. So they make the decision to take him to the rectory and convert him to Catholicism. March 23rd was the most violent night so far. He was barking, he was screaming, he was thrashing, he was cursing, he was spitting on people, he was wetting himself. He started pointing to some of the priests and predicting their death.
I see you in hell in 1956.
He managed to get one of his arms free, and he used that to deck Walter Helerin in the face and break his nose. And he hit another one of the priests as well and bloodied his nose. They're still trying to figure out what more can we do. He was baptized as a Lutheran. We are teaching him the ways of Catholicism. Let's baptize him as a Catholic. They set the day for his baptism as April 1st. They think almost all of his spells happen at night, so maybe if we take him there during the day, it will be more likely to be successful and without incident. On the car ride over to the college church, Ronald was in the back seat with his father. His uncle was driving and his aunt was in the passenger seat. Suddenly, the radio stopped working. And from the back seat, Ronald said,
"So, you think you can defeat me by baptizing me, ha-ha? You think you can get me out with Holy Communion, ha-ha?"
And then Ronald, he dove over the seat and grabbed the steering wheel and tried to wreck the car. His uncle managed to get the car back under control. His father grabbed Ronald and wrestled him back into the seat, and they pulled over. And at that point, both men got in the back seat to try to control Ronald. His aunt took over driving. But one more time, Ronald broke free and again went for the steering wheel, trying to kill them all. Luckily, they made it to the church. When they arrived at the church, there was one adult on each of his arms, dragging him into the church. Now, the church itself is a giant cathedral. You can imagine the noise of this boy's screams. And who knows, he was ranting and raving, maybe he was cursing, I don't know. But they drug him through the church, and they were able to finally successfully baptize him. The next day, they gave him his first communion, and this was also an interesting process. Every time they tried to give him the wafer, he would either spit it out or he would try to bite them. And later on in his life, Father Helerin said one time, because they gave him this multiple times, one time Ronald got his fist free and hit Father Bowden right in the groin and said,
"How's that for a nutcracker?"
By April 3rd, Ronald was so violent, they began taping his hands together so he could not hurt himself or other people. Another thing he had started doing before that was he always threw his pillow at the light to break the light bulb in the room, so his room was constantly dark, and he would break it again just as soon as they replaced the bulb. By April 4th, Ronald's father has missed so much work, he really can't afford to anymore. He decides we've got to get back to Maryland. We've got to find somebody who can take this case over so I can go back to work and don't lose my job and we lose everything. The St. Louis priests go with them to try to, well, first of all, to continue doing the prayers and also to try to find somebody to take the case over. Unfortunately, no one will touch it. They go back to Father Hughes, and he's polite, and he says, I'll help you try to find somebody. But he's basically like, no, not me. I'll try to help you find somebody, but I'm not doing it. And eventually, after a week of looking at place after place after place, they finally realize we're going to have to go back to St. Louis. There's not anybody here who's going to help us. They came back to St. Louis and placed him in long-term care at the Alexian Brothers Hospital in the mental health ward. It couldn't be helped. But they didn't want him to feel like he was a prisoner or that he was committed for the rest of his life. So occasionally, they would take him on day trips. One day, Walter Helerin took him to the White House Jesuit Retreat Center. It was located on a bluff overlooking the river. It was very beautiful, and it had all of these walking trails. Father Helerin was taking him on those trails, and they had the Stations of the Cross on the trail. Unfortunately, daytime episodes were becoming more common, and when they hit the 12th Station of the Cross, Ronald had one. Helerin said he closed his eyes, and he took off at a sprint for the edge of the cliff. Thankfully, Helerin was somewhat of an athlete. He took off after him, and he was able to tackle him to the ground before he reached the edge of the bluff. He would later say, "For the first time in my life, I made a decent tackle." In this period of April 10th to 17th, Ronald is more and more often speaking to people as the devil. The devil would no longer allow Ronald to attend Mass. And on April 17th, which was Easter Sunday, Ronald had such a serious seizure and was being so violent, they could not get him to Easter Mass. The Alexian brothers wanted to do something to try to help Ronald get better. So they bought some statuary to place in the hospital, one of St. Michael. One of the statues they bought was Our Lady of Fatima. And that statue, to this day, still stands in the lobby of the Alexian Brothers Hospital. That was purchased specifically for this case. Another thing they did is they started 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, praying for Ronald. So priests would take turns, one after the other, doing these prayers for this young man. Monday, April 18th, the day after Easter, started pretty normal. Thrashing, cursing. But at some point, Ronald started laughing diabolically. And he said this:
"That isn't enough. He has to say one more word. One little word. I mean, one big word. He'll never say it."
This went on all day. But at 10:45 that evening, another voice came from the boy. It said,
"Satan, Satan, I am Saint Michael, and I command you, Satan and the other evil spirits, to leave the body in the name of Dominus immediately. Now! Now! Now!
Ronald then began to seize. He had a seizure that lasted several minutes. And when it stopped, he relaxed, opened his eyes, and he said, "He's gone." Ronald told the priest, after becoming himself again, that while that happened, in his head he saw a man with flowing hair and a fiery sword, wearing armor, driving the devil into a cave where he then sealed it up in there. Father Helerin later reported that people in a church nearby say that at the instant Ronald found relief, they heard a boom in the church and that the church itself lit up. Ronald told the priest he had no memory whatsoever of anything that had happened during the exorcism. He stayed in touch with Father Bowden. Father Bowden actually officiated his wedding. He had kids. He named his first son after St. Michael. He went on to work for NASA. He apparently was a brilliant engineer whose work was instrumental in getting men onto the moon. He lived out his life. I've read that at the end, he wasn't really in a whole lot of touch with his kids. The woman who was living as his companion there at the end said it was very strange because as he was dying, a priest just showed up to give him last rites. And she said she had absolutely no idea how a priest knew to come. They hadn't sent for him. I'm just going to say there are many people who think this is a hoax. If it is, holy cow, a lot of people had to be in on this, including the priests. And up to 60 priests saw things they could not explain. Many times the scratches were on parts of Ronald's body he could not have reached on his own. I'm not qualified to say whether it was real or not, but what I can say is something really bad was happening in this family for them to uproot and leave Maryland and for his dad to miss that much work and come hundreds of miles away from home to find help. Ronald also lived in complete and total terror of people finding out who he was, especially after the movie came out in the 1970s. This wasn't something he did for attention. This wasn't something he did for money. Definitely for money. I mean, there are stories that maybe he just didn't want to go to school. Well, holy crap, you pretend like you're sick. You say, "Oh, I have a temperature today. I can't go to school today." You don't start this months long. That's crazy to me. There's got to be more. If it was a hoax, there has to be way more than just wanting to get out of school. Let me know what you think in the comments, but be civil about it. If you're rude, I will delete it. I'm not going to deal with that. Don't be mean to other people for believing what they want to believe. Intelligent conversation, please. Not being a jerk. I don't like that. I know jerks are all over the internet. It's something you deal with. But you know what? It's my page, and I don't have to put up with jerks if I don't want to. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed this Halloween special. Join me next time when I cover something else. Please find me on Patreon. I need all the help I can get. They like to demonetize me because this may be demonetized. I don't know. Is exorcism a bad word that'll get you flagged? Probably. It's not a super happy rainbows and unicorns story. So, if you'd like to support the channel so that I can keep doing this, I would so much appreciate it, and I appreciate anybody who's already doing that. I have a handful of people. Hi, Mom. Hi, sister. So I'm going to try to figure out a way to make that more fun. I don't know, maybe Discord, let people on there vote on things, on topics I could cover, certainly make suggestions of things they'd like me to cover. I'm going to try to figure out a way to help people be more involved and feel more involved. I'm not good at that part, you know. I'm good at research, and I'm good at making videos, and I am not good at that social media stuff. Maybe someday if I ever get big enough, maybe I can find somebody to help me with that part of it, because I just am terrible. You can find me at patreon.com/MadamMorbid, and you can also email me at madammorbidtopics@gmail.com. If you have had trouble getting a hold of me, I'm really sorry. Stuff was automatically uploading to that account from the videos I did and stuff, and I mean, it like filled it up in 10 days of me starting that email. So I don't know if people have had trouble getting a hold of me. If you have, I'm really sorry. I've wiped everything because it wasn't supposed to be going there. See you guys next time.